That's awesome. I've just been told that my 2-year-old has fallen asleep on top of the iPad. So what that means is it's now time to begin because this is our window of silence. So fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for being here today. This is very much a dress rehearsal. We've been trying to get something like this together for more than just a couple of weeks since this pandemic started, really for several months. We've been trying to figure out how to make something like this happen. So yeah, so here we are. So bear with any technical issues we may have. As a order of operation, please utilize the chat box that you have in the Zoom meeting. Our Director of Operations, Scott Kinney, is here and he will be manning the chat box. So if you have any questions at all, just ask them there and he'll interrupt me and we'll get those questions. So please feel free to ask away at any point in time. And also we'll have an open Q&A at the very end. My agenda here should run about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, and then just leave it open after that for however long people want to chat, and we'll just go from there. So again, thanks for everybody for being here. My name's Ryan Graham. I'm with Community and Council Realty. It's a real estate group that we founded last year. I've been in business for 17 years. I started out in the engineering world, but got into this business and fell in love with it. I've started 3 different companies. I had an independent brokerage called Georgian Realty, and then started a mega group similar to this one called the Graham Seaby Group in 2013. During that time, the 6 years that we were up, there was 2 years that we were the #1 team in the Southeast region. Had a lot of great success there. And then, like I said, the beginning of last year, started Community and Council Realty. And here we are today, kind of adjusting to this new normal that we're all dealing with. So on that note, our first talking point is really about the state of the market. I know that our subject for all of this was, to buy or to not to buy. I think this presentation could have been easily named to sell or not to sell, or even consider real estate in any way, shape, or form or not, right? I think it's always useful to think about real estate from both sides, because it's really not just about buyers, it's not just about sellers. It's a transaction involving both. But how do we navigate that? How do we in today's market? So there's a lot of change that's been happening. We're going to dive in deep on some of the protocol stuff that Community Council has implemented over the past several weeks, and kind of how that has changed some of the things that we're doing. But before we jump into that, I thought it would be useful to chat a little bit about the market. So what I want to start with is kind of a macro view of the real estate market, and then kind of dive in a little bit tighter on more of a micro view, talking just specifically about the Metro Atlanta area. Some of you may have seen a video about this that I put up a couple of weeks ago, but I was going to briefly run through it again. What we're looking at right now is a historical look of the stock market versus the housing market. And these are pricing indexes that date back to 1989 and that runs through essentially current day. The red line is the stock market over that time, and the blue line is the housing market over that time. And it assumes that both started in 1989 at the same value, in this case 100. That number is not relevant. What's relevant is they started the same, and this is how they changed over time relative to one another. So if you look at this rise here, what you notice is here in the late 90s and at the very beginning part of 2000, this nice big hump. And those of you that were aware of the market at that time will remember that being the dot-com bubble. Right. So as the dot-com bubble came, burst, and collapsed, what you'll notice is that the housing market was kind of slumping a little bit. And so this was kind of post the SNL scandals and and how that affected the housing market. So it wasn't a terrible collapse, certainly, but it just took some time for some loan programs to come out, from interest rates to come down before that curve could start reaching a little more of an upward trajectory. But kind of the big point here is that, as this fell, it looked like it wanted to kind of correct itself and maybe start coming back. But then, third quarter 2001, we had 9/11. And that, of course, sent the stock market into another tailspin and crash. But again, during that time, we had this continued rise in the housing market. Now, after 9/11, the housing market did flatten, but you can see barely here. It's just this tiny little flattening. But the market started to trend along. One thing to notice is as it was trending along through the early 2000s and heading towards 2007, 2008, you guys know what's about to happen there, right? that growth that was being experienced in the housing market was a pretty steep growth relative to what the housing market had seen historically. So we all know what happened in 2007, 2008, the big crash. By 9 and 10, we had pretty much bottomed out and just rode that trough for some time. The stock market rebounded faster than the housing market and started climbing away, and off it went until present day. And of course, COVID-19 has done what it has done to the market. But I want to point out that the housing market just continued to truck along, but not nearly at the pace that the stock market grew at. And so I think that's very important for us to think about. And it kind of leads me to why I keep talking about these two lines, is that even though since 2012 and 13, it has felt like the housing market has been on absolute fire. And trust me, it has been. Sales have gone like crazy. You would have these highest and best moments where properties were being bid up over their asking price. And while a lot of that is very much in the rearview mirror, still, though, there was very much a seller's market, the bottom line. But it didn't mean that there was this crazy growth in terms of pricing. We are just now barely over the peak pricing that we had in 2007, okay? We did not, however, have this steep of a growth. It was just a nice kind of steady growth that went along the way. And I think that's important. So my takeaway from this is that what happened to the housing market as a result of 2007 and 2008 was the housing market's own undoing. When we had an external factor come in, and also remember that the housing market was tied very directly to the bond market, which crushed and crippled the stock market. So that's why these two crashes happened together. Contrasting that to the dot-com bubble as well as 9/11, these were very much, and let's focus on 9/11, very much an outside force that came in and disrupted our world, crushed the stock market, but then both relatively quickly kind of came back, and the housing market basically didn't miss a beat. I don't think the same thing will be true today. I think the housing market will feel a little bit more of an impact than it did after 9/11. But I also equally think that it's not going to be some sort of epic fall, some sort of epic crash. And I've got some other data to talk about that I think supports that further. But kind of the takeaway here is, again, I believe that COVID-19 will impact the housing market much more like 9/11 than the housing bust of 2008. Moving on to something else I wanted to chat on. So this is more of that micro view. Okay, this is a direct plug into the first multiple listing service. That's the major multiple listing service for the Metro Atlanta market. This is a stats report that we can pull from, and essentially this is data for the entire MLS. So this is all the major county areas. It's a very large data set. So while it's not like national data, it is a large set of data. I want to kind of put a little bow here. At any point in time, you would like to receive specific data or have like a 15, 20-minute discussion with me or one of the agents on our team about data like this for your neighborhood that you either live in or a neighborhood that you think you might want to move to, we can use this tool and have very data-driven conversations around what the market looks like. So just like I said, feel free to reach out to me or anybody on the team. We'd be more than happy to schedule that with you. So what we're looking at here is, again, over the past 3 years, and what you're going to see is a lot of seasonality that we see in our business a lot. And everybody knows, like, the market increases in the spring and it gets the strongest kind of leading into the summer months. And then it kind of does a little up and down, and it gets its coolest in the December, January months. So you're going to see those kind of peaks and valleys over and over again. What we're looking at here is sales price over those periods of time. So you'll see that kind of bump up and then fall off and the bump up and the fall off and so on and so forth. And that is also true for March of this year. So this data is running through March. We don't have any April data for this year as of right now. New listings. So this is the inventory of new listings coming on the market. As you would expect, they come into the market, March, April, May, that's 2017. And then there's fewer and fewer that come on the market in December, November, these kind of winter months. Then you get more inventory, less inventory, more inventory, less inventory. March of this year, same story, right? December, low point, January, 10,000 new listings, 9,000, almost 10,000 in February, and then almost 12,000 in March. Homes for sale. So these are the active listings that are on the market. Again, that same type of seasonality curve. We see low points in the winter, high points in the summer. And again, we had no different this year. We had lower December and January, but you started to see that overall inventory being in place in March of this year. Pending sales. So this is the moment where we start to see some data that shows us that it's not all rainbows and sunshine, right? COVID-19 is a real thing, and we're already starting to feel some effects of it. And this is the effect. I'll go straight to it. March of this year, we have 7,000 properties that have gone under contract. Okay, comparing that to February of this year, there was 8,000 that went under contract. January, 7,400 that went under contract. You might not think much about that. Those are all relatively the same number until you start looking back in 2019, right? December, 4,600, January, 6,500, February, 7,200, and then boom, 9,000, right? Same story, January, February, March, April. So big jump up. Same story, January, February, March, big jump up. If you go back and look at all the data we have, which goes back to 2008, it's the exact same story every single year, that March has somewhere usually around 25 to 50% more properties go under contract than the previous month or two, except for this year. This is the first time in a 12-year period, that 12-year period including the housing crash of 2008, the first time that we've had a decline in the number of properties that have gone under contract in March compared to February or January. Right. And it shouldn't be a shock, right? It's a little like, oh, like I don't like seeing data that validates like reality that we all know in our heart, right? But so it is what it is. Closed sales, right? There's still lots of closed sales, and I'm going to go back to a smaller time frame, right? You're still seeing an upward projection of closed sales, but you have to keep in mind that the closed contracts are a reflection of things that were happening in February and January, right? So the good news here is that while we have heard stories of people backing out of contracts and not showing up at the closing table and these sort of things, it didn't move the needle enough. I think those are a very, very small percentage of the deals. The next thing that I want to talk about is months of supply.
Hey, Ryan, we got a quick question.
Yeah.
Thoughts on how the spring market will affect any of this?
It's a great question. So, what I've been saying, and I'm sort of kind of predicting, is while we're still seeing good transactional movement right now, there's these numbers I was talking about, the pendings, that show a little bit of a suppression. I've been calling it a pause. I think there is a pause about to happen in the real estate market, very much like it's happening in the entire world. There are still people who are actively looking, actively going to view properties, and actively writing contracts, active listings coming on that stuff. But there's obviously a depression, right? And so there will be a pause, but when this opens back up, I think our spring market is going to be a summer market. And I think there is some data here that suggests, and I've read some things from some pundits that have suggested that spring summer pop is going to be an explosion. There will be a lot of pent up demand and a lot of activity taking place. So yeah, that's what I think. I think the spring market will be more like May, probably June, July, August, something like that. Good question. So looking at months of supply, again, it's shown. So months of supply is if no listings came on the market starting today going forward, how many months would it take us to sell off all of the listings that we currently have? So the numbers that you see here, are ranging between 2 months to 3 months, 3.3 months, a low point of 2.4 months, getting up to three months. Okay, great. Who cares? What does that mean? Well, what that means is if you see about 6 months of supply, we consider that a neutral market, meaning that it's neutral. It's not a seller's market. It's not a buyer's market. It's fairly neutral. Anytime you're less, and certainly significantly less than 6 months, it's very much a seller's market. And again, beyond that, 8, 9, 10, 12 months, now you're talking about a buyer's market. And you can think about that in terms of supply and demand, right? It's the supply of inventory that we have. So when there's an abundance of supply and everything else being relatively equal, you're going to have, it's more buyer friendly, pricing probably is suffering, as opposed to the inverse where pricing is benefiting and it's more a seller's market. So this is, right, all fine and good. I think, again, when you start looking over a longer period of time, so going back to 2012. So 2012, January, very much marked the beginning of the end of the Great Recession with respect to the housing market. Okay, this is where we started seeing massive sell-off in the investor space. So all of your 30 to $100,000 investment properties just started flying off the shelf. And it wasn't really until 2013 that we saw the retail market wake up. So like normal buyers and sellers, owner occupants, people looking to buy their home. That's when that market started to wake up and come alive. So really, we were at about a 6-month. So it seemed like it was, from a data perspective, a neutral market at the beginning of 2012. Kind of, sort of. If I had the data to show you from 10 and 11, you would have seen that it was like 8, 9, 10, 11 months on market. So that this line was already coming down pretty quickly. And you can see how quickly it came down to 3 months starting in 2013. Well, when the retail market woke up, like our normal buyers and sellers, bigger influxes of inventory and the buyers capturing it, and bigger influxes of inventory and the buyers capturing it. But you see this steady decline of months of inventory over and over and over again. And then we get to current, right? 2.7 in December, 2.6 in January, 2.5 in February, and even right now in March, we're at 2.8 months of supply. These are the lowest supply numbers that we have seen ever in my career, really. And so what that means is that there's still just not enough inventory for the buyer demand that exists. Granted, 3 months or 2 months or 1 month ago, right? That was that demand that we don't have, or we have less of today. But I think this really speaks to, it would take a long time of sellers putting an abundance of inventory on the market and buyers being unwilling to buy it to get this number back up to 6, 7, 8 months. In other words, an amount of supply that would start declining the values of real estate in the Metro Atlanta market. So this is kind of one of the bigger data points that I point to say, yeah, I mean, yeah, we don't know the future, but I mean, this is, I joked about in my email, the crystal ball, this is my crystal ball that tells me that, you know, if we stay in this pace, the state that we're currently in for years, like, right, all bets are off. But I think the reasonable expectations within the next few months, things will start to move back towards center to where we need to be. And that's not enough time for the inventory on the market to kind of create an effect where we're having a devaluation in property values. So that was a lot of data. Made myself dizzy there for a second. Great. So best practices. We wanted to talk about this and how the market has changed. And I think, well, let me actually hang on. Let me talk a little bit about you know, to buy or not to buy, right? Or to sell or not to sell. And so I think this is the appropriate bridge point to have this conversation. So what is the market telling us? The market is telling us that there is less pending activity happening right now. And we can tell you from people with boots on the ground that there are fewer buyers that are super active. I will say the ones that are active are very aggressive and very serious. So they're very ready, willing, and able to buy. So the opportunity to sell still very much does exist. You know, I am not fearful of a decline in values. So if you're afraid to sell or to buy because you're either waiting for a dip to take advantage of it, I just, if I was a betting guy, I would say that's probably not a smart bet. Or if you're fearful as a seller to maybe just kind of wait for all the dust to settle and figure out, you know, when things are going to start getting back on pace, to wait till then. Again, I think you're waiting for something that's likely to not happen. That's what the data is telling me. So if you are choosing to move forward, I think it is very important that you're mindful from a public safety standpoint, from a public health standpoint, to do the prudent things to make sure that you're ensuring your safety and everybody else's. So these are the things that we have implemented at Community and Council. And these are very common practices that you're going to see like throughout Keller Williams and the industry as a whole. But things like going on showings in separate cars. I'll dive into some other stuff here in a minute, but before even that, we're minimizing the number of showings by trying to maximizing our online viewing experience. So whether that's walking through properties just with photos, you know, one-on-one with the agent in a Zoom meeting, we're starting to see more and more 3D tours and video tours come available. So walking through those together, we're trying to like really crank up that virtual showing experience first and minimizing the number of houses that we're actually walking through. Then when we do go out and walk through, taking separate cars, we're making sure that we're wiping down door handles and door switches. We have a policy of, you know, agents touch and buyers look. So our agents are going to be the ones opening doors and turning on light switches. If the property is occupied, we want to ask our sellers to turn on all of our lights, get all of the doors open as much as possible so that we minimize the touching that's there. And then also we're having conversations with sellers, and if they would like to have booties worn, shoes removed, if they'd like to set out some hand sanitizer to make sure people are using on their way in and on their way out, we're absolutely proponents of that, and making sure that those sort of measures are being supported. Again, back to the virtual showings, we've moved away from in-person open houses for obvious reasons, but doing them via a Zoom meeting or something like this is kind of a new thing that we're playing around with. All of our monies are being transferred electronically. This is not a super new thing. People were still writing checks for earnest money and other services along the way, but now we're just going to eliminate that and say all money gets wired over. We're minimizing contact and exposure at closings. And then of course, our company itself is working from home, just like everybody else is. Virtual consultations, we can do one-on-one meetings virtually, just like this one that we're doing. Making sure that all of our online searches are very much up to date and up to speed. Again, diving very, very deep into all of our virtual tours and virtual experiences. On that note, I did want to share what a virtual tour does look like. So this is a new listing of ours that just went live in Tyrone. And some of you, I'm sure, have seen a 3D Matterport before. Let me make this full screen for everybody. Right, so this is like a 3D dollhouse of a property, and you have these thumbnails. You could even view it from outside. Hopefully it's going to work for me. There it is. All right, so you can take a look around, look out into the cul-de-sac where you're at. So if you have a pair of VR goggles, it actually supports VR. So you can even do this in a true virtual reality kind of space. So you just move around and you click on these dots, and you just literally walk through the property and check it out. So it's, nothing compares to being in person, right? But you can see it's a pretty immersive experience. You can accomplish a lot from the showing experience. So you can even walk upstairs and all that kind of stuff. So this is on our website. If you go to our featured listings, if you guys want to play around more with it, I'm not going to spend any more time showing you how that works, but that is a fun tool. So we're looking for more of these to come available here in the near future. Touched on virtual open houses. Inspections. So inspectors have, a lot of the great inspectors that we work with have really instilled a policy that they want to minimize the number of people who are showing up to inspections. I was joking with one of them. They said, now that everybody is kind of stuck at home, they're looking for any reason to get out and get around people. And so they were having a large kind of groups showing up at these inspections, and they said, hey, we have to stop that. The client, definitely, they can come. We'd like to reserve that for just the very end. Agents are welcome to come, but we're encouraging our agents to just do this remotely as well. And then knowing that the inspectors are doing a really good job making very thorough reports. So again, just trying to minimize exposure there. Oops. Touched on earnest money, closings. Just so there was a recent change in the Georgia legislature that is allowing for electronic notary. And it's also allowing for essentially fully virtual closing. So this is very unprecedented. We've done mail-away closings in the past, and we've done a lot of remote things in the past, but to allow for electronic notary signatures is great. So literally, you don't have to go to a closing attorney's office to close on a real estate transaction right now. So there's always going to be a little nuanced thing here and there, an alternative to that, but we can literally do everything electronically, which I think is a great thing. I mean, jokingly, but hey, we can even deliver the keys to the house. So a lot of this may seem somewhat strange and foreign, and like, how could you possibly buy a house in circumstances like this? I will say that we've helped remote clients for years, especially a lot of like California investors in particular who were attached to the movie industry. And with the big movie boom here in Atlanta, you would have folks buying duplexes and triplexes or single family homes, and they were buying them sight unseen. And I know that that was an investor thing, but we had a lot of owner occupants do the same thing, and they would negotiate, do everything via video and all this kind of stuff, and then show up and see the house maybe for the first time just before, sometimes even just after closing. So it's very foreign to everybody right now, but not to everybody, and certainly not to our business. Some of the bigger and more notable changes, if you have been thinking about the financing aspect of this, getting a loan, and even if you've gotten pre-approved, pre-qualified, make sure you're checking back in with your lender. things have changed, right? Some of the guidelines have changed, some of the credit requirements have changed, some of the employment verification has changed. And this is both at the lower and the upper end of the spectrum. We've seen a lot of jumbo loans disappear from certain lenders. They're still out there, but you just have to go to some specific lenders to be able to acquire them. And certainly the restrictions on that, so the qualification criteria is become more stringent. So in the middle, not as many changes, but regardless, now would be the time to definitely get on a Zoom meeting or a phone call with your lender. And again, we have plenty of resources that we can help you with there. Just you don't want to be caught with any surprises. If you're in the planning process too, maybe you are waiting 2 or 3 months, 4 months, right? It's a great time to start that planning process too, so you can kind of get your ducks in a row. We touched on this already, but again, I think it's a big deal that we have this electronic notary available to us now to be able to facilitate closings in an electronic fashion. So I just touched on this a second ago. It is time for planning and information gathering. I think there are a small group of people out there that they've got to buy or they've got to sell right now. And we're helping those folks get going right now. But I think for the bulk of folks, they're just kind of sitting back and going, I don't know, let me just see how things go. I'm not even sure if I'm going to have a job in 3 months, or I don't know if my income is going to be affected, and these kind of things. And yeah, we're not making big buying a house kind of decisions or selling a house kind of decisions in the midst of that uncertainty. So it is though a good time for planning. So I would encourage everybody to reach out to somebody on our team or somebody that and just start doing some planning, a little homework on the front end to help get you ready. I'm not going to go through this, but this is an example of our home buying process. We can spend about 20 minutes with you just kind of going through all of the steps. It's very organized and thought through, and it just kind of shows you what's going to happen through the process. So this is what I mean by planning. And this is kind of a before and after the offer process that we look at, just again, to know what to expect and how this process is going to unfold. Yeah, so again, well, real quick before we jump into an open Q&A for anybody that's still hanging in there with me, I definitely want to say thank you to a couple of people. Samantha Williams, she's on our team. She handles a lot of things for us. Social media is her sweet spot. She's actually in the midst of moving today, believe it or not, but she was very instrumental in putting all this together. So thanks, Samantha. Scott, thank you for being here and helping put everything together as well with her and with me, and for manning the Q&A. And then a big thanks to my wife, Michelle. She made this presentation deck for us, helped me bounce a bunch of ideas to kind of get this rocking and rolling. So thank you very much, everybody, for your help in making this happen.
Hey, Ryan, we do have a question from Lisa. It's what's happening with refinancing?
So refinancing, that's a really good question. It's still out there. It's still available. The changes in guidelines and restrictions are the same for refinancing that they are for home purchasing. I think the biggest thing to not be concerned about, but be mindful with, is that refinancing is very much on the back burner for most lenders. The rates plummeted before all this happened, right? And the lenders were getting way overwhelmed with refinance applications. So they were backlogged. So it's likely that it'll take longer, and it's likely that there will be some hiccups along the way. So I would just say, if you're interested in refinancing, absolutely pursue that. It is a good time because rates are so low. I would say be patient and be a little tempered in some expectations, but it will get done. And again, we have great resources with great lenders that can get it done. All right. Anybody else have any questions?
I've got a quick question. How are you handling the conversation with a seller who wants to weigh renting versus selling?
A seller who wants to weigh renting versus selling. So we're talking about somebody who owns a property and like, well, do I rent it and kind of weather the storm that way, and then, or do I sell it?
Correct.
That gets into a very specific conversation that I think is kind of hard to answer universally. And so, but what I would recommend is you always want to focus on your goals. So like what I mean by that, what's the impetus behind wanting to sell? Is it that we're trying to, reallocate cash into, another part of our lives, either another investment property or renovate a house or get, more liquid to be prepared for a retirement that's coming up? Or is it just that we're concerned about what might happen with the market? and we either want to get out ahead of it and sell now quickly, or it's that we want to go ahead and get the tenant back into place and weather it out. I think that's a very specific risk tolerance type of question. So what I would want to do with that person is have a deep dive conversation on what their individual risk tolerance is. And let's play out some scary scenarios. Let's for a second assume that the things are going to get really, really bad, right? Let's assume that the market value drops by 10, 15% in the next 6 months. So if that happens, what does that look like for you, seller, right? If you were in a position where you had to sell at a 15 to 20% loss 6 months from now, what would that feel like for you? How would that affect your goals that you're trying to accomplish? Or do you want to take a chance that things go well? So it's one of those things you really have to kind of ask a lot of deep questions and kind of play out various scenarios and just see which one moves the needle the most for you. And then you can make a decision based on that. There's a lot of sellers that we've talked to recently that said, look, my goal is to move to a new location or to get into a better school system or relocate for a job or what. Like, we have these conversations a lot. Like, people are always mindful of the market and how it's affecting value and how it's going to affect time on market and all of these kinds of things. And those are very important things to think about and talk about. But what's more important in most cases with real estate, the home that you own, that you live in, right, is the life event that's triggering what's about to happen. And I think you have to always focus on that's what's driving this and how disruptive do we want to be to that life event, right? If the real estate transaction drives everything, in other words, the money that's coming out of that property or relieving yourself of the debt associated with that property, if that is the number one thing, then it usually modifies the conversation significantly. But in most cases, there's something else driving the desire to sell the house. And so we just need to make sure that the decisions that we make, and the market affects those decisions, but really the decisions that we make are supporting the life goal that's trying to be accomplished, not getting bogged down in the market factors that are affecting the real estate transaction. Hopefully that answered the question or made sense. Cool. I do appreciate everybody being here. If we had any more questions, give you guys a few more minutes.
Graham, I had a question. This is Brendan, by the way.
Hey, Brendan.
I just wanted to touch base. I'm hearing a lot of people saying, hey, reach out to your folks, cut expenses, kind of go back to chopping wood and setting up pipeline for once all this goes over. What other advice do you have just for agents kind of going through this, just as we think there's a lot of unknown about how it's going to, necessarily hasn't gone down, or we're not seeing anything suggesting values are going to fall, but what would your advice be to agents just during this time as far as how to make the most of it?
Yeah, it's a really important question. It's one that we've been talking about for 4 weeks now, constantly. And I think the answer to the question is back to basics, right? It's not a time to be, heavy-handed in sales, right? Like, hey, who wants to buy or sell a house? Like, yeah, that's a little awkward and uncomfortable. I think it's absolutely a time to do two things. One, be a resource to people. And look, let me be honest, that's what I'm doing today. I'm trying to, share my professional expertise with anybody that would like to hear it. Try to cast a little bit of light in the darkness about, what I do see as light in terms of the real estate market. So give some people something to look towards as opposed to being terrified of what we're in. And then at the same time, just being a resource to say, what questions do you have? Like, I'm here, let's go through this planning process. Look, that's the conversation I've been having with people, just reaching out. Like, it started with folks that were in process with transactions. They were either listed or under contract, or they've been looking for properties. Hey, how are you feeling about all this? Like, how are you? Are you concerned about your job? How is this going to impact that? Like, let's reevaluate where we are. Let's unpack our goals, revisit our goals, and let's just see what that all looks like. And let's figure out, do we need to reposition ourselves? And then having that conversation, and then that turned into just, reaching out to friends, to past clients, to family, to, whoever, putting the social media posts out there, put it out there in the space. I'd encourage you, Brendan, to do something like this. Just kind of put yourself out there, let people know you're here and you're available. We got free time on our hands, right? But that's yes, back to basics. It's about being in relationships with people, and it's about being a resource. But I think more than ever, just being a friend to everybody. And, and if people have real estate transactions to do, they're going to reach out. They're going to want to talk to you about that. But I think most importantly, a couple, 3 months from now, when this starts to, refocus and we start moving forward, you'll have been that person that, people remember being calm and being steady and being a person, being a friend through all of this. Because I think that's what we need right now more than anything.
Thanks, Grant. By the way, I saw that post from y'all's team Zoom call. That was probably the best thing I saw all day yesterday.
Awesome.
Scott as the captain, Marco as Maverick from Top Gun.
That was a fun one. I think Dawn came the week before. She had she had a funny hat on, and so it was her idea. Like, all right, everybody's got to dress up. So.
Hey, Brennan, can you show everybody your mustache?
Mustache, come on, B.
I'm sweating right now. Are y'all ready?
Come on.
All right. Give me a second. I have to comb it.
Stop.
No. All right, I'm coming.
Brendan, I know you. I know you've got like all the best gear too, the best hardware for mustache grooming too. So.
All right, my camera is from like 08, so it's just gonna look like a Al-Qaeda beheading.
The room is full of excitement right now. I can feel it.
I'm so glad I asked.
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all can see it.
Oh.
It's there though.
That's awesome.
Thanks for sharing.
Look at Justin.
Oh, Justin.
Oh, it's Bella's birthday, isn't it?
It was for Bella for sure. It's not her birthday, but yeah, it was for Bella.
Wow, it looks great, man.
Yeah.
Graham, thanks for doing this. That was awesome.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah. Any thoughts on the millennials and how they're affecting the market for real estate agents?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what you mean. I know a few weeks ago they seemed to be less encumbered by what was going on. In other words, they were less concerned about social distancing. They still seem to be very, very active. I don't know if that's still the case, but they certainly, I mean, projecting, right, they probably will be a larger piece of the buying pool going forward. They're probably of that 66% of the pending market that was out there in March. They were probably a very large percentage of it, if I had to guess.
Brendan, you're a millennial, right? How are your friends? What are your friends thinking about this market?
So yeah, lately my two most active on the buy front have been close friends I grew up with. One of them had a wedding that was for next month, and they were kind of loosely thinking about buying. Now he's thinking they pushed all the way until next month or next year. So I said, well, are you guys wanting to wait till after the wedding? Is this something you want to tackle in the meantime? And then I think his particular feedback was he doesn't want to miss out on these interest rates, so I think he sees opportunity. And then another really good friend of mine is just paying a lot in rent, so he still sees value to buying regardless where the market is, and he's planning on staying in a place for at least 4 years, before he'd move on. So I think it makes sense for him regardless of what the market does, because it'll save him money, and I think he'll net out further ahead in comparison to if he just moved on the same course and continued renting for the next 4 years.
Cool.
I can tell you my activity has been mostly millennials, and like one in particular right now, their monthly income is really high, but they just haven't saved the money. So this jumbo loan being frozen is really hurting them because they want to shop in the sixes, but they don't have the down payment to keep the loan at 510. So, but they're not deterred. They don't think they're going to lose their jobs. One of them is a nurse, so she clearly is not going to lose her job.
Right.
Do they have their 20% down?
No.
Ah, okay. there with that idea.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here. I'm going to kill the recording now, but this is going to go up. Actually, we're streaming live on YouTube, so it's going to be on our YouTube page. Feel free to pass the link along if you think anybody benefit from it. And yeah, we're going to try to do more of these, get them kind of out on a more consistent basis. So this was a dress rehearsal. So I appreciate all of you guys. I think it went actually fairly well. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, it went great. Thanks everybody for attending.
We didn't crash any servers or anything, so I think we're good.
You want to edit out a bit about my mustache? That's totally cool.
Oh, no, we're actually going to use that for all of the marketing. Just like that right there. It's burned in my mind. I want it burned in everyone else's mind.
Oh, I'm gonna kill you, Harvey.
It's so awesome. Thank you, Harvey.
Yeah, you bet. My contribution.
Good one.
All right, everybody. Thanks for being here. See you around.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Good to
guys.
see y'all. Bye.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
Good stuff, right?
Dude, that was great. It sounded really good too.
Nice.
You did a good job like speaking through that.